In today's show, we're going to talk about Power Apps date functions and the time functions too. Right? But what we're going to try and do is just break down all the different date and time functions, where to work with them, talk a little bit about UTC, and just make sure that we understand kind of how to change those date objects, how to get them, how to change them from text into actual dates and times, formatting them, just all the little fun things you need in your life, because who doesn't need another date? But first, here's our intro. Hi, my name is Shane Young with Power Apps 911, those guys. And today's show, we talk about the Power Apps date function and its time functions, and just overall what kind of date and time stuff that you need to do to be better at Power Apps, right? We all kind of get how to work with it at the beginning, but you find as you go more and more down the rabbit hole, your boss is like, hey, make the app do this or that. You're like, I wish I just knew like one more thing about dates or times. Well, this is that video. I've had a lot of questions lately from customers and consultants around, how do I do this or that? So hopefully this video will just kind of walk you through all of it. If you're a superstar at Power Apps, you probably already know all this, but that's all right. Sometimes a good refresher doesn't hurt either. So with all that, let's just switch over to my desktop and take a look. And so over here on my desktop, just to give you a preview of what we're going to work through, right? We're going to talk about the now function, the today function, the time zone offset, and just UTC time, talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about how now works with variables versus on the screen. And then we're going to get into things like adding time to date, getting the differences between two dates, and then how to turn, build yourself a little input like this and actually get the date. So nothing too complicated, but I thought it was a good little fun set of lessons. So let's just start up here with now, right? If you haven't seen it before, the now function, it returns the current date and time. And so by default, Power Apps goes ahead and formats this out for you. But in reality, the now function is getting even down to the seconds as well, right? It's doing more than it's showing. You'll also notice, right? So right now I'm hovering over it. It's like 305. But it shows 241. So anytime you put now like in a label, whatever it is when that label got rendered, it's going to stick with that. So there's no way to like refresh the timestamp on the screen. So that kind of annoys people. So one of the things you might see down here though, is right now I've got a code here, right? So set var now, create a variable called var now, and we're going to store the now function in it. The reason I do this is because if I click on the set now variable, it goes and fetches the time right this minute. And so if I click on the variable in, 2 minutes from now, it'd be 307, right? You get that. But the reason I point this out is because a lot of times we want to date timestamp things. Like when did the user edit this record, right? When did they clock in? When did they clock out? When did this thing happen? And in those scenarios, you're like, well, this fact that now didn't refresh on the screen, that's a problem. You're right. But when you use now again in a function, look, I talked for a minute, good job me. But when you use now in a function, then what happens is it goes and fetches it. So if you use now inside of like your patch statements, which is very common, right? I want to patch the time that the user did this thing. If you're using now there or using it here where I'm setting in a variable, it'll always get the most, it'll get right now. But if you stick a label on the screen, then the first time that label gets rendered, it's going to kind of lock that in. And even if I leave the screen, right, it says 241. So if I go to a different screen and I go back, still going to stay 241. So nowing labels only refreshes once, but nowing inside of a formula does all the time. Okay. Secondly, there's a function called today. So if you just need the date, then that will return today. And once again, Power Apps is kind of smart. It returns it as a date time object, but it only returns you the date. And so if you hover here, you're going to see, well, actually what it is it is 1/24/2020 at 12 a.m. It sets today to midnight at that particular spot. So every now and then that causes a little bit of confusion for people because they're like, well, why did it pick midnight? Well, when you just pass a date, it gets stored as a date time. And so it just uses the midnight or assumes the midnight is the time you needed. So sometimes like I'm working with my buddy Jim right now, who's kind of who made me think about making this video on some stuff around time off request and calculating time diffs and things like that. And we had to kind of account for midnight is really, if we're working with just dates, midnight is what it looks at versus, if you say, I want to take off tomorrow for lunch from 12 to 1, that's a little bit different. So just think about that when you're looking at these. But today returns the today. Now, the most common challenge that people have when they start getting into times, I literally get this call probably once every, at least twice a week. Someone will say, hey, I'm writing my times to somewhere and the time is off, right? They're like, why doesn't my time work? Well, what really happens is underneath the covers, Power Apps and most data sources, they talk in UTC time, right? So if I patch to my SharePoint list now, it is actually going to save into SharePoint the UTC time, right? So it's going to say, all right, well, right now it is 3 o'clock in the Eastern time zone, which is 8 o'clock in UTC. So it's going to store over in SharePoint 8 p.m., right? Because that is the UTC time. Now in SharePoint, when I go look at the time over there though, what is SharePoint going to show me? Well, SharePoint's going to show me the time based on the regional time zone or the regional time setting of that SharePoint site. So as long as that site is set into Eastern, then it would show me that I did now at 3 o'clock, just like I would expect. So this problem of time zones, if you get into scenarios where you're like, hey, all my times are off by 3 hours or 5 hours, or some static hour number, it is almost always a time zone issue. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a whole nother video where we're going to dive into and understand that deeper. But since we were talking about date and time today, I want to kind of start planting that seed with you guys that, UTC is usually the most common reason for time confusion. The same type of thing can be held true. Remember, we talked about this date, right? So if I save this date to a date time field, it's going to get saved as 1:24:12 a.m. Or, right, it's actually going to get set, the time zones can affect that. So sometimes I get people, especially like my Eastern time zone people, they're like, hey, all my dates are off by a day. Well, they're not actually off by a day. What happened was you had a time zone issue and it's off by 5 hours, which if you start at midnight, 5 hours is the previous day. So it looks like it's off by a whole day. So anyway, we're going to do a whole video on that at a different point. But what I wanted you guys to know in this context of this video is there is a function called the time zone offset. And so that will tell you how far the current user, right? So me logged into my browser here, how far I am off. And so it is always going to be in minutes. So I am 300 minutes, which is, 300 divided by 65 hours. And I'm 5 hours off UTC. So there is a function for figuring out how far a person is away from time zone or from UTC. This will also come up in another video. So Sharon recommended, hey, why don't you do a video on calendars and setting calendar appointments and things? That's a good idea, Sharon. And so when we do that, we're going to have to talk a little bit about time zones as well and how I kind of work around that. The other thing I want to remind you guys is that we can format time. And so we do that with the text function. So I can say take now and then use the text function to show me now in UTC format, right? And you'll notice there that it's like, okay, 2001, 124 at 1941 and 46.657 Zulu, right? I mean, it gets really complicated, but that is the full UTC of when this particular label got rendered. Remember, now got changed. So if I say, let's see if we can get now to refire. We'll do today. So that's UTC of today, right? 124 and 5 hours, right? Because today at midnight is what now returned, or what today returned, and so it jumped it ahead 5 hours. So then now, hopefully if we put now in here, now we'll refire. And so then 124 at 2011, yes, that is 8:11. So that is the UTC time of right now. So perfect there. But I want you guys to know that there are a whole bunch of functions here. So using the text function. Now remember though that this is then changing the date and the time to be a string. It is no longer a date time object. It is a string. It just happens to be formatted. But when you pass it, you can see there's a bunch of optional parameters. So I'd be like, hey, show me the long date time in 24. And so then now I would see, Friday, January 24th, 2020 at 13/12/28, because that is 24-hour time. So a lot of fun you can have here. Date time format, and we're going to do UTC, because that's what I had in the code. But the text function is how you manipulate what the time shows back. And if these little pre-canned ones don't work for you, like so my European friends, right? Us Americans, we like our dates in MMDDYYY, right? You like DDMMYYY. So what you can do is come in here and go DD/MM/YYYY. And so then now you can see that it is 24 of January of 2020, right? So I was able to switch the date format around. If I'm like, oh, you know what? I want to show the month name here. No problem, right? 3 M's is the the short month name. 4Ms is a long month name. For the day, I think there's some weirdness here too, right? So I can change that. 3Ds is the day, so it's Friday. Today's Friday. Congratulations, Jay. 4Ds is Friday spelled out. So lots of fun to be had with this. And if you're like, whoa, how do you know all this? Why are you doing all this so fast? The reason for that is because you don't have to remember any of this, right? You go to Power Apps, Formula Reference, my favorite piece of Power Apps documentation. Go right here. And so then if we go find our friend, we'll just do T's over here, the text function. And so in here, it explains all those pre-canned formats. Yay! It also explains how to do like what the 1M, the 2M, the 3M, the 4Ms all mean. So very nice of them. So great little piece. I'll put the link down below. But if you guys don't come to this page at least once a week, we're probably not friends, right? This is what me and my friends do on Friday nights, is we find new ways to read the Formula Reference for Power Apps. I'm waiting on a version in Klingon or something cool like that. That's not true, but anyway, I think that, this is a really great page. And when you find a function like text, it breaks it down for you pretty well. Okay. So that's formatting date and time, a little bit about how to figure out the offset. We talked about the variable. So then now let's go down here. And so if we hit play, just to make this easier. So what I did here is I said, all right, whatever is in this date picker. So we're going to say, so it's 124. If I put a 5 here, it's going to spit out 129. So today plus 5. And so the way that we do that is there is a function. Whoop, where's my function? It's right here. It's called the date add function. And so the date add function, the way that it works is you give it a date. And so in this case, I'm saying my date picker, the dot selected date. And then I'm going to say, here's the number of units. So in my case, I want to take this 5. And so since it's a text 5, I need to turn it into a number 5. So I use the value function there. And then out here in the end, you've got different options. And so you can do days, hours, milliseconds, minutes, months, quarters, seconds, years, right? All types of fun stuff that you can add to it. But so this is the proper way if you have a date or a time and you want to add to it. So that is how we add days to it, right? And if we, that gives us just some different flexibility. Where I use this a lot is like one of my customers, I have to decide whether or not today is a holiday and whether or not they want something delivered as a holiday. And so I end up having to use date add and then date subtractions and things like that to figure out what is today plus 5, like what is the actual date of today plus 5. So a lot of that type of stuff that happens in my life. And so date add is the proper way to add it. Sometimes Power Apps will let you be lazy and literally just say, like, take the date and add plus the number 5 and it'll figure it out. But don't do that type of stuff because you're just counting on Power Apps knowing what you mean, right? When you use the date add function, you know that it's going to know what you mean. Now, what if you want to subtract 2 dates? That's a fair question. So down here, I did that. And so if we change this one to be, we'll do the 31st. So you can see the difference between these 2 date pickers. I think I did that in hours. Yep. So date diff, so you provided a date and you provided another date. And then the same as before, we can say, I want you to give me the difference between these 2 dates in hours, minutes, seconds, days, whatever it is that makes sense for you. But this is a great way for you to do the math, right? So in this case, I said, what's the number of hours? Here, we'll change this to days so it's easier to read. Now notice the difference between date pickers is 7. Now, if you go, and that's because it's 7 days, right? The way I wrote my thing. But if I end up saying, oh, what if I put the from date, back to the 17th, right? So backwards. So then now it's even a -7. So Power Apps understands what you're doing. And it's all you're doing is say, hey, subtract the date from, right? Which is the top one. And then subtract this one. And so that's where we got a -7 there. You can do that for, I'm showing dates because dates are super easy to demo, but you can do that with times as well. And that is how you would figure out when you're trying to figure out, like, hey, start of vacation, end of vacation, how many days did that person want to take off? There you go. That's the type of thing you use. It's the date diff function. Okay, moving right along. Over here, I made a nice little input, right? Because invariably, nobody wants users, and most users aren't smart enough, quite frankly, to type in dates or times in a format that's really easy for us to like package up and turn into an actual date and time. So what you want to do is we want to let the users enter a bunch of strings. So in this case, they're like, oh yeah, 7 on 28, and then I just threw 3 dates in here, right? 2021. And so then that spits out July 28th, 21 over here as a date value. And so the way that I do that, the date value function takes strings, or takes a string, one string, and turns it into a date. And so what I've done here is I just wrote out a nice little fun string that spits out 7/28/21 because that's the format that the date value expects. And so you can see drop down month selected value, that's the 7. And then I concatenated a /, and then I concatenated the text input from right here, the 28. I concatenated that, and then the drop down for the year selected. You'll notice here on the 28, I did go ahead and change the text input to only allow numbers to go in there, so that way people couldn't do it. And if I was really writing this for a customer, I would also then go write some logic to make sure that they weren't typing in like this is the 60th or whatever. What's interesting though, watch what happens. If I say 7/60, well, Power Apps just says, okay, well, July had 31 days, and so you had 29 more days, so that incremented the month. Power Apps actually figured out what I meant, but that's a really weird date. So just don't let your users do weird things like that. The other thing a lot of times you might do is just change this to be an actual drop down of things. So if you don't trust your users to type in numbers at all, it happens. But the date value function is great. The other thing you can do with the date value function, right, if we blow this out of here, is I could just be like, hey, 12, 25, 2019, close that out. And so it figured out, right? So if you want to just be able to type in a string, like just for, because you're like, hey, I want to set this thing to always remind me on Christmas, and you didn't want to like, that's the way that you take the numbers or the value, the string, and turn it into an actual date value, right? Pretty fun that it knows the difference between the dots and all that. So, and then also remember you could pop these together. So right now that's turning this into an actual date, yay. What if I wanted to show that in a different format, right? We would just throw the text function around it, text, and then we would go out here and we'd say, hey, I want you to show me that in long date format. And look at that. Now it says Wednesday, December 25th, or make it read it, Wednesday, December 25th, because that's the long date format. So you can always stack these things, right? I use this first function to turn words into an actual date, and the text, because the text function needed an actual date to operate against, and so then we went and did our thing. So pretty cool there. Down here below, the time value function, I did the same exact thing. So just, drop down hours selected. In my little picker here, so right, I have hours 1 to 12, so 10. And then because I'm lazy, I made it 15-minute increments. You could put everything in here. You could make it an input, whatever you want. But so 10:30 p.m. And so you can see over here, it spit out a time value of 10:30 p.m. And I just did the same thing. I just took and made that big old string, right? It's one concatenated string. And so then Power Apps said, oh, I can figure out how to change that string into a time value. And so now it's an actual time object. And that's important because if I want to do time calculations, you can't do time calculations on a string. You got to get it into time value so you can do things like date diff and things like that to calculate the difference between two times. Down here, this is just the long version. I will not explain it again, but this is the date time value function. So if you needed to take a string that was both date and time, that is an example of what that would look like. Pretty straightforward, I think. Now, the other thing you might have noticed if you've been reading your Power Apps documentation is there is also a there is also a date function, right? So you're like, what's the difference between date and date time? That's a great question. That's what I'm supposed to be here to answer. Date takes values and you have to put in numbers, right? So here I'm gonna be like, all right, so 2012, comma, 7, comma, 11, 7/11. And then that turns into July 11, 2012, right? And then once again, you're like, now give me put the text function around that. Boom. And then what do I got here? I'm going to say, let's do it as space DD space Y. Oh, but when you're doing these formulas, capital M's versus lowercase m's make a difference. So now it says July 11th, 2012. I'll probably do a little comma right there. And so then, right, that spits that out. But so what's key here though, sorry, I got sidetracked on a little bit of myself there, but the date function and there's also a time function, they both require numbers, whereas the date value and the time value took strings. So it took me like a minute to wrap my head around it, so I thought it was worth mentioning to you guys as well, right? But yeah, time, same thing. So 12, and then what is the minutes? 33. What's the seconds? 01. Was the milliseconds? Oh yeah, there is 09 milliseconds. Boop. And so then that spits out 12:33 p.m. And so then, but if I wanted to see the whole thing, right, what would I have to do? I'd have to be like text. I use the text function a lot in my life. And then there is a time format. How about long time? Long time right there. There you go. And so then now it says 12:33 and 01. So very, very fun. Cool. Okay. So those are the different functions that I wanted to make sure you guys understood how to use. Now, as a little bonus real quick, what I thought I would show you. So over here, you know, now that you kind of got your head hopefully wrapped around these different functions and how you're going to use them, over here I wanted to show you my fancy screen. My buddy Daniel LeMay, when we were talking about this earlier, right, he's one of our consultants here. He gets nerds out way too fast. He made me a component where I can go in here and enter this stuff and it spits it out just like that, right? Boop. Go over here first. And so the way that he did that, right, I mean, it literally is just a component. Let's go over here, right? And so this label is set up to the output of that component. If you go over here to components, then you can see that he just built out all these things that we did. And then he said, all right, spit out full date time as an output property. And so he did that. And if you go over here, full date time, and then there's the formula. So he used everything that I just taught you. He just put it in a component. So in his apps now, instead of having to rewrite that every time, he just drops in that component. And now he's got a date time picker. He's already got it formatted. I mean, it looks really bad right now, but you know, he made it in 32 seconds, so I won't judge. But anyway, he pulled all that together so that he has a reusable component for letting people enter or select the date and the time. And then it just spits out over here, right here. It spits out, and that is a date time object. So I could write that over to my data source. I could do date math type of things on it. I could use it in my text function. It doesn't matter. So that'd be one of those things I'd love to hear about you guys doing, right? Leave me a comment when you do it below, but take one of these concepts and build yourself a reusable component, right? Maybe you have to calculate the difference between people's clock out and clock in times all the time, or weird things like that, or you want people to be able to put in 2 different times and tell them how much overtime they're going to get paid if they work between those 2 times. Whatever. Make something cool. Make it a component so it's reusable. So then that way you kind of always have the same entry experience. I kind of like that. So, as always, right, I'll just remind you guys real quick, if you are a subscriber, this app is available for downloads. You can go grab it, and so you don't have to copy all these formulas. You can just grab the app, and you've got all the formulas. It all works. You can do your thing. I'll even leave Daniel's component in there. Don't tell him. He'll want royalties or something like that. But all that's available out on training.powerapps911.com. As always, if you need anything, you know how to get a hold of me. Leave me a comment below. You can email me, Shane@powerapps911. You can hit the PowerApps 911 website. I'm available. I'm here. So hopefully you found this useful and all that. I'm just going to say thanks and have a great day. Before you go, be sure to click on the subscribe button over here so that way you'll be notified when new videos come out. If you need any help or you want to work together, whether your problem's big or small, check us out at PowerApps 911. We do it all. I rhymed. Or if you're looking for more formal training offerings, we have those linked up here somewhere. So check them out. Thanks and have a great day.